Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, her flight suit hanging loose around her small frame as she walked through the military base. The other pilots towered over her, their voices booming with confidence as they discussed combat strategies and shared war stories. Sarah had dreamed of flying fighter jets since she was 8 years old, watching aircraft soar overhead at air shows with her father. Now at 25, she had finally earned her wings after years of grueling training, but acceptance from her squadron remained elusive. The whispers followed her everywhere she went. Fellow pilots questioned whether someone of her stature could handle the physical demands of aerial combat. They wondered if she possessed the strength to pull the heavy control stick during high-gravity maneuvers, or if she could reach all the necessary controls in the cramped cockpit. Some openly expressed doubts about her ability to eject safely if needed, citing concerns about her weight and size meeting minimum requirements. During training exercises, Sarah consistently performed well, but her achievements were often dismissed as luck or attributed to easier scenarios. When she successfully completed challenging flight simulations, instructors would nod politely but seemed unconvinced. Her scores were impressive on paper, yet the underlying skepticism persisted. The military had only recently opened combat roles to women, and Sarah represented something new and unfamiliar to many of her colleagues. Her commanding officer, Colonel Richards, maintained a professional demeanor, but Sarah could sense his reservations. During briefings, he would assign her to reconnaissance missions or support roles, while giving the more aggressive combat assignments to male pilots. When Sarah requested more challenging duties, she was told she needed more experience, despite having logged hundreds of flight hours. The squadron was stationed at a forward operating base in a conflict zone where tensions ran high. Enemy forces had been increasingly aggressive, launching surprise attacks on military installations and civilian targets. Intelligence reports suggested a major offensive was imminent, and all pilots were placed on high alert. Sarah spent her days maintaining her aircraft and studying enemy tactics, preparing for the moment when she would finally prove her capabilities. She had grown up in a military family, with her father serving as a decorated Army officer, and her older brother following in his footsteps as a Marine. Sarah chose the Air Force, drawn by the precision and skill required for aerial combat. Her family supported her decision, but even they sometimes worried about the dangers she would face and whether she was physically equipped for such demanding work. The base buzzed with activity as mechanics worked around the clock to keep aircraft mission ready. Sarah formed friendships with the ground crew, who appreciated her attention to detail and respectful treatment of their expertise. Unlike some pilots who treated maintenance personnel dismissively, Sarah understood that her life depended on their skilled work. She would often stay late, learning about engine specifications and weapon systems, earning respect from the technical staff even as fellow pilots remained skeptical. Training had been the most challenging period of her life. Physical fitness requirements pushed her to her limits, but she exceeded every standard through determination and careful preparation. Flight school instructors had been tough but fair, focusing on performance rather than preconceptions. However, the transition to active duty brought new challenges as she encountered deeply ingrained attitudes about women in combat roles. Sarah's small apartment on base reflected her focused mindset. Aviation magazines covered her coffee table, alongside technical manuals and tactical studies. She had no time for the social activities that occupied other pilots during their downtime. Instead, she devoted every spare moment to improving her skills and knowledge, knowing she would need to perform exceptionally well to gain acceptance. The upcoming mission briefings would soon determine assignments for what intelligence suggested might be a decisive engagement with enemy forces. Sarah hoped this would finally be her opportunity to demonstrate that size and gender had no bearing on courage, skill, or effectiveness in aerial combat. She had trained for this moment her entire adult life, and despite the doubts surrounding her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited in the skies above. The emergency alarm pierced through the early morning silence, jolting Sarah from her sleep. Red lights flashed throughout the barracks as pilots scrambled to dress and report for an urgent briefing. Intelligence had detected a massive enemy formation approaching their sector, with reconnaissance suggesting this was the anticipated major offensive. Sarah's heart raced as she quickly put on her flight suit, knowing this could be the moment she had been preparing for her entire career. In the briefing room, Colonel Richards stood before a large tactical display, showing enemy positions and flight paths. His expression was grave as he explained the situation to the assembled pilots. Enemy forces had launched a coordinated attack, involving over 40 aircraft, targeting both military installations and nearby civilian population centers. The approaching formation included fighters, bombers, and support aircraft, representing the largest air threat the base had faced in months. Sarah listened intently as the colonel outlined their response strategy. Most pilots would be assigned to intercept the main enemy formation, while others would protect the base and surrounding areas. As assignments were announced, Sarah felt her stomach sink when she heard her name called for defensive patrol duty, rather than the primary intercept mission. Once again, she was being relegated to a supporting role while the major combat action would be handled by others. The other pilots began filing out to prepare their aircraft, discussing tactics and expressing excitement about the upcoming engagement. Sarah remained seated, struggling with disappointment and frustration. She had trained extensively for exactly this type of mission, yet she was being assigned to fly circles around the base while her colleagues engaged in actual combat. The familiar pattern of being overlooked continued, despite her proven abilities and dedication. As she finally stood to leave, Colonel Richards called her name. He approached with a conflicted expression, clearly wrestling with a difficult decision. Intelligence had just reported an additional enemy formation approaching from a different vector, one that had initially been missed by radar due to low-altitude flight patterns. This secondary group posed a significant threat to evacuating civilians and could potentially overwhelm the base's defenses if not intercepted. The colonel explained that all other pilots had already been assigned to the primary mission, leaving only Sarah available for this newly discovered threat. He emphasized that this was a dangerous assignment, as she would be flying alone against unknown numbers of enemy aircraft. The mission would require exceptional skill and judgment, as there would be no backup or support available. Sarah's eyes lit up as she realized this was finally her opportunity to prove herself in real combat. Colonel Richards hesitated before giving final approval, clearly still harboring doubts about sending their smallest pilot on such a challenging solo mission. He reminded Sarah that she could request to switch assignments with another pilot if she felt unprepared for the responsibility. His tone suggested he expected her to decline, preferring the safer defensive patrol role. Instead, Sarah straightened her shoulders and confirmed her readiness to take on the mission. The weather conditions added another layer of complexity to the assignment. Cloud cover was thick at medium altitudes, reducing visibility and making target identification more difficult. Enemy aircraft would have the advantage of choosing when and where to engage, while Sarah would need to locate and intercept them before they could reach their targets. The odds were clearly stacked against her, but she felt more determined than ever to succeed. In the equipment room, Sarah checked and double-checked her gear. Her helmet fit perfectly, despite being one of the smallest sizes available, and her flight suit had been tailored to accommodate her frame without compromising functionality. She reviewed emergency procedures and studied the latest intelligence reports about enemy aircraft capabilities and tactics. Every detail mattered when facing superior numbers in aerial combat. The other pilots were already taxiing their aircraft to the runway as Sarah completed her pre-flight inspection. Her fighter jet was older than some of the others, but had been meticulously maintained and equipped with the latest weapon systems. She ran through the startup sequence methodically, knowing that mechanical problems during combat could be fatal. The engines roared to life, and she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with preparing for flight. As she waited for clearance to take off, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Years of training, countless hours of study, and persistent determination had led to this opportunity. The doubts and skepticism of her colleagues faded into the background as she focused on the mission ahead. She would finally have the chance to prove that courage and skill mattered more than physical size in aerial combat. Control tower cleared her for takeoff, and Sarah advanced the throttles. Her aircraft accelerated down the runway, lifting off into the gray morning sky. Behind her, the base grew smaller as she climbed toward the clouds where enemy aircraft waited. This was her moment to demonstrate that she belonged among the elite fighter pilots, regardless of what others thought about her capabilities. Sarah climbed through the thick cloud layer, her aircraft shaking slightly as it penetrated the turbulent air masses. The gray world around her cockpit limited visibility to just a few dozen meters, making navigation challenging and increasing the risk of surprise encounters with enemy fighters. She relied heavily on her radar and radio communications with ground control to maintain awareness of potential threats in the area. At 12,000 feet, she broke through the clouds into brilliant sunshine, the dramatic change in lighting requiring a moment for her eyes to adjust. The world below remained hidden beneath a solid white carpet, while above stretched an endless blue sky. Sarah scanned the horizon methodically, searching for any signs of enemy aircraft while maintaining radio contact with base operations. Ground control crackled through her headset with updated intelligence. Radar had detected multiple aircraft approaching from the northeast, flying in formation at low altitude to avoid detection. The enemy group appeared larger than initially estimated, possibly including 8 to 10 fighters along with several bombers. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized she would be facing overwhelming odds, but her training took over as she began calculating intercept courses and attack strategies. She descended back toward the cloud layer, planning to use the cover to her advantage. By positioning herself between the enemy formation and their likely targets, she could potentially engage them as they climbed to attack altitude. The element of surprise would be crucial, as her single aircraft would need every possible advantage against superior numbers. The first enemy aircraft appeared as small dots on the horizon, gradually growing larger as they approached her position. Sarah counted 12 fighters in loose formation, with additional aircraft following behind. Her heart pounded as she realized this was far more than intelligence had predicted, but there was no time to request additional support. The enemy was already too close to civilian evacuation routes. Sarah positioned her aircraft above and behind the enemy formation, using the sun's glare to mask her approach. Years of training had taught her to be patient, waiting for the optimal moment to attack. She checked her weapons systems one final time, ensuring missiles and guns were ready for combat. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she prepared to engage. The enemy fighters maintained their course toward the evacuation routes, apparently unaware of her presence. Sarah selected her first target, a fighter on the outer edge of the formation that would be easier to engage without immediate retaliation from the others. She armed her first missile and waited for the targeting system to achieve a solid lock. The moment arrived as her radar indicated optimal firing position. Sarah launched her first missile, watching the white streak arc toward the enemy fighter. Within seconds, the missile found its target, and the enemy aircraft exploded in a brilliant fireball. The remaining fighters immediately scattered, their formation breaking apart as they searched for the source of the attack. Sarah dove toward the clouds, using the vertical space to maintain energy while repositioning for her next attack. Enemy pilots were now actively hunting for her, their radio chatter indicating confusion and alarm at the unexpected assault. She had achieved the crucial first strike, but now faced the challenge of continuing the engagement against alerted and aggressive opponents. 2 enemy fighters turned toward her position, apparently having spotted her aircraft against the cloud backdrop. Sarah pulled hard on her control stick, the aircraft responding immediately as she maneuvered to avoid their incoming missiles. The high-gravity turn pressed her deep into her seat, but her small frame actually provided an advantage in withstanding the physical stress of extreme maneuvering. She rolled inverted and pulled through a sharp diving turn, emerging from the clouds with enemy fighters in pursuit. The radio crackled with urgent communications from both friendly and enemy forces as the engagement escalated. Sarah's training took complete control as instinct and muscle memory guided her actions in the fast-paced aerial combat. The second enemy aircraft presented itself as a target as Sarah completed her evasive maneuver. She fired another missile at close range, scoring her second kill as the enemy fighter disintegrated under the impact. However, more enemy aircraft were converging on her position, and she realized the full scope of the challenge she faced. Ground control attempted to provide updates on the tactical situation, but Sarah was too busy maneuvering to pay close attention to radio traffic. She had entered a deadly game of three-dimensional chess, where split-second decisions meant the difference between victory and death. The skills that her colleagues had questioned were now being tested in the ultimate arena. Despite the overwhelming odds, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of since childhood. The doubts and skepticism of others seemed irrelevant now, as she focused entirely on survival and mission success. Each maneuver, each shot, each decision would determine not only her fate but also the safety of countless civilians below. The aerial battlefield had become a chaotic dance of death as Sarah found herself surrounded by enemy fighters. Aircraft streaked through the sky in all directions, leaving contrails in the smoke from destroyed planes. Her radio filled with urgent warnings from ground control about additional enemy aircraft joining the engagement. But Sarah was too focused on immediate threats to process the information fully. 3 enemy fighters had formed up to attack her simultaneously, forcing Sarah into increasingly desperate evasive maneuvers. She pulled her aircraft through a violent barrel roll, feeling the intense pressure as gravitational forces tried to crush her against the seat. Her smaller stature actually proved advantageous here, as she could withstand higher G-forces than larger pilots without losing consciousness. Sarah spotted an opportunity as one enemy fighter overshot her position during an attack run. She reversed direction sharply, bringing her guns to bear on the exposed aircraft. A sustained burst of cannon fire tore through the enemy plane's wing, sending it spinning toward the clouds below in flames. Her third victory came just as another enemy pilot locked onto her with a missile. The incoming missile warning filled her cockpit with urgent beeping as Sarah threw her aircraft into a series of random turns and climbs. She deployed chaff and flares to confuse the incoming weapon, while simultaneously positioning for her next attack. The missile passed harmlessly by as she completed a climbing turn that brought another enemy fighter into her sights. Her fourth missile launch scored another direct hit, but Sarah had no time to celebrate as enemy fire began impacting around her aircraft. Bullets shattered through the air nearby, and she could hear metallic impacts on her plane's fuselage. A quick check of her instruments showed minor damage, but no critical systems affected. She remained in the fight despite the growing intensity of enemy fire. The engagement had been underway for less than 10 minutes, but Sarah felt as though hours had passed. Time seemed distorted in the heat of combat, with each second stretching as she made life-or-death decisions. Her training had prepared her for this, but the reality exceeded anything she had experienced in simulations or exercises. 2 more enemy fighters approached from different angles, attempting to catch her in a crossfire. Sarah recognized the tactic and responded by diving toward the clouds while turning to present a more difficult target. The maneuver worked perfectly, causing the enemy pilots to interfere with each other's attack runs while positioning herself for another offensive strike. She climbed back above the cloud layer to find the battlefield had spread across dozens of miles of sky. Aircraft debris fell like deadly rain toward the earth below, while the survivors continued their violent ballet among the clouds. Sarah had lost count of how many enemy planes remained, but their numbers still seemed overwhelming despite her success. Her 5th kill came when an enemy pilot made the mistake of trying to engage her in a turning fight. Sarah's aircraft responded more quickly to her inputs, allowing her to gain position behind the enemy fighter. A short burst from her cannon was enough to disable the enemy plane, which rolled over and began its final descent toward the ground. Enemy radio chatter revealed growing confusion and concern among the attacking force. They had expected to encounter minimal resistance, not a single fighter that seemed capable of taking on their entire formation. Some enemy pilots were calling for withdrawal, while others demanded reinforcements to deal with the unexpected threat. Sarah used this confusion to her advantage, striking at enemy aircraft that had become separated from the main group. Her 6th and 7th victories came in rapid succession, as she exploited the disorganization among enemy ranks. Each successful attack further demoralized the enemy formation while building her confidence and momentum. However, the sustained combat was taking its toll on both Sarah and her aircraft. Fuel consumption during high-intensity maneuvering was enormous, and she could see her gauges dropping toward critical levels. Additionally, her ammunition supplies were running low after multiple engagements. She would need to make every remaining shot count. The enemy formation attempted to regroup, with remaining fighters forming up for a coordinated assault on her position. Sarah realized she faced her greatest challenge yet, as 8 enemy aircraft approached in a disciplined attack formation. Her small size and agility had served her well against individual opponents, but this coordinated assault would test every skill she possessed. She climbed toward the sun, hoping to use the glare to mask her exact position, while the enemy formation approached. The next few minutes would determine whether her remarkable run of success could continue against organized opposition. Sarah checked her remaining ammunition one final time and prepared for the most intense phase of the battle. Ground control was frantically trying to vector additional friendly aircraft to her position, but Sarah knew help was still minutes away. She would have to face this final challenge alone, relying on the skills and determination that had brought her this far. The doubts of her colleagues seemed like distant memories as she prepared to prove definitively that courage knew no size limitations. The coordinated enemy assault began with precise timing as 8 fighters approached Sarah's position from multiple directions. Their formation discipline showed these were experienced pilots who had quickly adapted to her tactics. Sarah realized she could no longer rely on surprise or confusion among enemy ranks. This would be a test of pure flying skill and combat instinct. Sarah chose to meet the attack head-on, rather than attempting to evade, a decision that surprised the enemy pilots who expected her to run from superior numbers. She dove directly toward the center of their formation, her aircraft screaming through the air at maximum speed. This aggressive move disrupted their planned attack sequence and forced them to adjust their approach at the last second. As she passed through the enemy formation, Sarah fired her remaining missiles at 2 fighters that presented clear shots. Both weapons found their targets, bringing her total to 9 confirmed kills. However, she had now expended all her long-range weapons and would have to rely solely on her cannon for any additional engagements. The enemy fighters scattered after her bold charge through their formation, but quickly began reforming to continue their assault. Sarah used the brief respite to assess her situation. Fuel was becoming critically low. Ammunition was nearly exhausted, and her aircraft showed signs of damage from near misses during the intense combat. Despite these challenges, she remained determined to complete her mission. 3 enemy fighters managed to achieve firing positions on her aircraft simultaneously, filling the air around her with deadly projectiles. Sarah performed a series of violent maneuvers that pushed both herself and her aircraft to absolute limits. She could feel consciousness beginning to slip away as G-forces peaked, but she fought to maintain awareness during the crucial evasive sequence. Her desperate maneuvering paid off as all 3 enemy attacks missed their mark, but Sarah found herself in an increasingly precarious position. More enemy aircraft were joining the engagement, and she was rapidly running out of options. Her fuel gauge showed only minutes of flying time remaining, and mechanical stress from extreme maneuvering was causing systems to malfunction. In a moment of inspiration, Sarah spotted a gap in the enemy formation that might allow her to score additional kills before withdrawing. She rolled inverted and pulled through a sharp diving turn, positioning herself behind 2 enemy fighters that had become separated from the main group. Her cannon fire destroyed both aircraft in quick succession, bringing her total to 11 victories. The remaining enemy pilots were now showing clear signs of demoralization and confusion. They had lost most of their formation to a single opponent they had initially dismissed as insignificant. Radio intercepts revealed discussions about withdrawal and calls for immediate reinforcements to deal with what they now recognized as an exceptional threat. Sarah's 12th and final victory came when an enemy pilot made a critical error in judgment. Frustrated by his inability to score a hit on her elusive aircraft, he attempted a desperate head-on attack that played directly into her strengths. Sarah's superior marksmanship allowed her to score a killing shot while avoiding the enemy's return fire. With 12 enemy aircraft destroyed, the remaining fighters finally broke off their attack and began withdrawing toward their home base. Sarah had accomplished something that seemed impossible when the engagement began. Her fuel situation was now critical. With warning lights illuminating across her instrument panel, she needed to return to base immediately, or risk running out of fuel over enemy territory. The flight back to base passed in a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Sarah's hands shook slightly on the controls as the reality of what she had accomplished began to sink in. She had not only survived an engagement against overwhelming odds, but had achieved a level of success that would become legendary in military aviation history. Ground control guided her toward the runway as emergency vehicles positioned themselves along the flight path. Sarah's aircraft was trailing smoke from minor battle damage, and her fuel gauges showed reserves that were measured in seconds rather than minutes. The landing would need to be perfect, as there would be no opportunity for a second approach. As the runway appeared through her windscreen, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with relief. She had proven beyond any doubt that skill and determination mattered more than physical size or gender in aerial combat. The doubts and skepticism that had followed her throughout her career seemed trivial compared to what she had achieved in the skies above. Her aircraft touched down smoothly despite the battle damage, rolling to a stop just as the engines began to sputter from fuel starvation. Emergency crews rushed toward her plane as Sarah shut down the systems and began the process of extracting herself from the cockpit. The engagement was over, but its impact would be felt throughout the military aviation community for years to come. Sarah sat in her cockpit for a moment longer, watching the ground crews approach while reflecting on the remarkable events of the past hour. She had entered combat as a pilot whose abilities were questioned by her peers, and had emerged as someone who had achieved one of the most remarkable aerial victories in modern military history. Sarah climbed down from her aircraft with unsteady legs, the adrenaline that had sustained her through combat now leaving her system. Ground crew members surrounded her plane, examining the bullet holes and shrapnel damage that told the story of her incredible aerial battle. Their expressions showed amazement at the extent of damage her aircraft had sustained, while still managing to return safely to base. Colonel Richards was among the first to reach her, his face displaying a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Intelligence reports had been tracking the engagement through radar and radio intercepts, but the full scope of Sarah's achievement was only becoming clear as confirmation came in from multiple sources. 12 enemy aircraft destroyed by a single pilot in one engagement was unprecedented in recent military history. The debriefing session that followed lasted several hours as intelligence officers sought to understand exactly how Sarah had accomplished her remarkable victory. She described each engagement in detail, explaining her tactical decisions and the factors that had contributed to her success. Her calm, professional recounting of events impressed everyone present, as she showed no signs of boasting or exaggeration. Word of Sarah's achievement spread rapidly throughout the base and beyond. Pilots who had previously questioned her capabilities now looked at her with obvious respect and admiration. The transformation in attitudes was immediate and dramatic, as her performance had definitively answered all doubts about her flying skills and combat effectiveness. News media began arriving at the base within hours of the engagement, seeking interviews and details about the remarkable air combat victory. Military public affairs officers worked to manage the story while protecting operational security, but Sarah's achievement was too significant to keep completely confidential. She became an instant celebrity within military aviation circles. The other pilots in her squadron returned from their own missions to find their base buzzing with excitement about Sarah's accomplishments. Many approached her personally to offer congratulations and express their newfound respect. The same individuals who had whispered doubts about her abilities now sought her advice on combat tactics and flying techniques. Sarah's aircraft was examined by maintenance teams who marveled at the battle damage it had sustained. Multiple bullet holes, shrapnel marks, and stress fractures from extreme maneuvering told the story of an intense combat engagement. The fact that she had successfully returned to base with such extensive damage testified to both her flying skill and the aircraft's robust construction. Intelligence analysis revealed the full strategic impact of Sarah's mission. The enemy formation she had engaged was part of a larger offensive that had been disrupted by her intervention. The destruction of 12 aircraft and the demoralization of enemy forces had contributed significantly to the failure of their planned attack. Civilian evacuation routes had remained secure because of her actions. Recognition came swiftly from higher military command. Sarah was recommended for the highest decorations available for aerial combat, with her achievement being forwarded through channels to the highest levels of military leadership. The speed and enthusiasm of the recommendations reflected the extraordinary nature of her accomplishment. Fellow pilots began seeking Sarah's input on tactics and training, recognizing that she possessed insights that could benefit the entire squadron. The knowledge and experience she had gained during her solo engagement against overwhelming odds was valuable to everyone involved in air combat operations. Her status within the unit was completely transformed. The technical aspects of Sarah's achievement became the subject of detailed study by military aviation experts. Her ability to maintain effectiveness while operating alone against superior numbers challenged conventional wisdom about air combat tactics. Training programs began incorporating lessons learned from her engagement to better prepare other pilots for similar situations. Sarah handled the sudden attention with characteristic professionalism, using her newfound platform to advocate for merit-based evaluation of all pilots regardless of gender or physical characteristics. She emphasized that her success had come through preparation, training, and determination rather than any special attributes. Her message resonated throughout the military aviation community. The psychological impact of her achievement extended beyond her immediate unit. Female pilots throughout the military felt encouraged by Sarah's success, seeing it as validation of their own potential for excellence in combat roles. Her example helped break down remaining barriers and prejudices that had limited opportunities for women in aviation. Media coverage of Sarah's story reached civilian audiences, inspiring countless young people to consider careers in military aviation. Her achievement demonstrated that excellence in flying had more to do with skill and determination than physical size or gender, encouraging a more diverse group of candidates to pursue pilot training. Colonel Richards formally addressed the squadron to acknowledge how wrong their initial assessments of Sarah had been. He used the opportunity to emphasize the importance of evaluating personnel based on performance rather than preconceptions. Sarah's achievement had taught valuable lessons about the dangers of unconscious bias in military organizations. The base commander announced that Sarah's aircraft would be preserved as a monument to her achievement, with the battle damage left visible as testimony to the intensity of her combat engagement. This decision ensured that future generations of pilots would be reminded of what could be accomplished through skill, courage, and determination, regardless of doubts from others. 6 months after her remarkable aerial victory, Sarah found herself at the center of changes that extended far beyond her original squadron. Military leadership had taken notice of how preconceptions about pilot capabilities had nearly prevented one of the most successful combat missions in recent history. New policies were implemented to ensure that pilot assignments were based strictly on performance metrics rather than physical characteristics or gender. The highest levels of military command awarded Sarah the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the most prestigious decorations for aerial combat. The ceremony was attended by senior officers from multiple branches of service, highlighting the significance of her achievement across the entire military establishment. Sarah used her acceptance speech to honor the ground crews and support personnel who had made her mission. Possible aviation training programs were revised to incorporate lessons learned from Sarah's engagement. Simulator scenarios based on her mission became standard training exercises, challenging new pilots to develop the skills and decision-making abilities needed for success against overwhelming odds. Her tactical innovations were studied and taught to future generations of combat aviators. Sarah was promoted ahead of schedule and given command of her own flight squadron, becoming one of the youngest officers ever to hold such a position. Her leadership style emphasized merit-based evaluation and the importance of giving all pilots opportunities to prove their capabilities. Under her command, the squadron developed a reputation for excellence that attracted top talent from across the military. The enemy forces that had faced Sarah's devastating assault conducted their own analysis of the engagement, leading to changes in their tactics and training programs. Her ability to single-handedly disrupt a major offensive operation became a case study in enemy military academies, demonstrating the impact that one exceptional pilot could have on strategic outcomes. International allies requested briefings on Sarah's tactics and achievements, recognizing the value of her experience for their own air forces. She traveled extensively, sharing lessons learned with foreign pilots and helping to strengthen cooperative relationships between allied nations. Her story became known throughout the global military aviation community. Documentary filmmakers and authors sought to tell Sarah's story, ensuring that her achievement would be preserved for future generations. These productions emphasized not only her combat success, but also the broader lessons about overcoming prejudice and recognizing talent regardless of traditional expectations. Her story inspired people far beyond military circles. The aircraft manufacturer studied Sarah's plane extensively after her mission, using insights from the battle damage to improve design and protection systems for future models. Her engagement provided valuable real-world data about aircraft performance under extreme combat conditions, contributing to technological advances that would benefit all pilots. Sarah established a scholarship program for aspiring pilots from underrepresented backgrounds, helping to ensure that talent would be recognized and developed regardless of social or economic circumstances. The program became highly competitive, attracting exceptional candidates who might otherwise have lacked opportunities to pursue aviation careers. Years later, Sarah transitioned to a role in military education, developing curricula that emphasized performance-based evaluation and the dangers of unconscious bias in personnel decisions. Her courses became mandatory for officers in leadership positions, helping to prevent the kind of prejudicial thinking that had initially limited her own opportunities. The base where Sarah had been stationed became home to a memorial honoring her achievement and its broader significance. The monument served as a reminder that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources and that organizations performed best when they judged individuals by their capabilities rather than preconceptions. Former colleagues who had initially doubted Sarah often approached her to apologize and express their admiration for what she had accomplished. These conversations provided opportunities for reflection on how bias could affect decision-making and the importance of remaining open to possibilities that challenged conventional thinking. Sarah's story was included in textbooks and case studies used in military academies around the world. Future officers learned about her achievement, not only as an example of exceptional piloting skill, but as a lesson about the importance of creating environments where all personnel could reach their full potential. The impact of Sarah's mission extended to civilian aviation as well, where her example encouraged airlines and aerospace companies to reconsider their own hiring and promotion practices. Her success helped open doors for women and others who had faced barriers in pursuing aviation careers, contributing to greater diversity throughout the industry. 20 years after her famous mission, Sarah had risen to the rank of general and was responsible for pilot training across multiple air wings. Her influence on military aviation culture was profound and lasting, having helped transform an institution that had once questioned her potential into one that actively sought to identify and develop talent wherever it might be. Found the 12 victory marks painted on her preserved aircraft continued to inspire new generations of pilots who visited the memorial. Sarah's achievement stood as proof that determination, skill, and courage could overcome any obstacle, including the doubts of those who failed to recognize potential when it appeared in unexpected forms. Her legacy ensured that future pilots would be judged by their abilities rather than their appearance, creating opportunities for excellence that might otherwise have been overlooked.